Oh, hello.
Hello.
I'm chatting as a guest. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Would you be
Executive
open
coach.
to me introducing you as a New York Times bestselling author and executive coach?
Perfect. Perfect.
I also consider you a possibilitarian, which is a phrase for people who are expansively creative with their designing their lives, creating their lives. All
Love it.
right. Generally speaking, it's pretty open-ended conversation. I'm asking you about the art of the possible and how it manifests in your life, how you create your life.
I'm super into it.
Hi, I'm Dave Gray, founder of the School of the Possible, where we're exploring a new approach to learning. Most schools focus on teaching existing facts. In the School of the Possible, we focus on possible facts, things that do not yet exist, but could be so. The school is about creating the future, but it is rooted in the present. No matter who you are or where you are, there is a best next step for you. A step that you can take. A step toward a better, more fulfilling, more meaningful life and work. A step toward a better world. That's the art of the possible. The art of the best next step. And it starts now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Gray. Thanks for joining us on The Art of the Possible. Today I'm talking to my friend Chris Brogan, a New York Times bestselling author and executive coach. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave.
It's so good to see you. First question I have for you is what goes through your mind when I share this Peter Drucker quote, "The purpose of business is to create a customer."
It's a real smart quote in a lot of ways. I follow certain little tribes online, and one of the ones I love to watch are these people that want to call themselves entrepreneurs, but they have unintentionally called themselves this because they thought that what that meant is the least possible work, feet on a beach, something, right? And the people that I was most enamored with growing up as business people were the kind of people who could just say the most simple thing and get more business. Could you use a little blank or whatever? Example, in this place where I live, I had a guy come in who I needed to assemble some IKEA furniture. And he says, "Oh, noticed your walls are a little scuffed. You probably need some painting done. You want me to paint your walls?" I was like, "Huh, interesting. How much?" And of course, it was a somewhat reasonable number, made much more reasonable by the fact the man is standing there. He
Right.
goes, I could do this later today, or I could be here next week. What's good for you?" I was like, I didn't even, what they call it, an assumed sale, where the
Yeah.
person, I put myself on the hook. I swallowed the hook. I choked it as fast as I could. It was fascinating. And I
But it
think
was what you wanted, right?
Drucker's right. I was
Took
the
care of,
customer.
yeah, right. That's interesting because you talk about startups, like there is a whole, let's say, gaggle of groups who believe that the purpose of business is to fool an investor
Uh,
or to create an investor, and that the customer just becomes like a sec. I'm not a Shark Tank fan or aficionado, but I do occasionally bump across it surfing channels. And some people are looking like they want the investor just to take carry them. Some people look like they're actually thinking about creating customers. So, but there is a group that is just their focus is on getting money to finance the lifestyle that they want or something like that.
I was just listening to a guy who is a ship magnate, and the way he started his business, he's a billionaire, but the way he started his business is he was a finance guy in New York, doing mostly real estate financial things in New York. And he didn't like the life, he just liked the money. And he said, "I've always loved ships." He was raised in Rhode Island down the street from me pretty much.
Mm.
And he said, I thought to myself, I wonder if some of what I know about how to do finance in real estate, I wonder if that translates into owning those real big ships, the kind
Mm.
tankers and container ships and that sort of thing. It turned out, yes, it turned out there were lots of people with lots of financial challenges. He had these ways to help them. And there's always investors out there looking for some way they can get some money passed around. And so he had since childhood worked on little boats and then bigger boats and then even bigger boats. And then he was working on ships. Like when I say worked on, though, like crew, not a rich dude. But he knew boats from the ground up. He knew all the things that were going to go wrong with a boat. He knew all the services somebody who
Mm.
bought a ship like that would need. So he was just building systems around one thing that he knew and loved super deeply. And I think that's where we have to go. He said you have to. He goes, if I told somebody today, how do you want to get rich? I would say go find something you absolutely love to do. Figure out if there's somebody who pays money for something even vaguely related to that thing you love, and then figure out a way to live in that world. Because we obviously work harder on things that we're passionate about, and that made sense to me.
Yeah, that really resonates with me too. And it gets to this topic of purpose, but also just this idea of finding this thing that you love. For me, it definitely comes down to having a creative project. I either have a creative project or I'm in a slump. Those are like my two kind of states. And when I'm in a slump is okay, I'm looking for the next creative project, whatever that might be, that is energizing and fulfilling and creatively energizing. When
Yeah,
you think about if you think about the thing that you absolutely love to do, how would do you have a framing or a way that you describe that or think about it? You said you're a writer.
sure. I write because I always thought that's what I wanted to be. Like I wanted to write comic books. I wanted to do something in visual work. I thought it'd be really neat to tell stories. But as decades have gone on and I find myself with all the ability in the world to do that sort of a thing, I never do it. And I will listen to things. I listened to this little video clip of George Lucas saying, if you watch Star Wars 1 through 6, the way it's intended in my mind. And I paused to allow a lot of negative feelings about 1 through 3 out of my head. But he says, if you watch it 1 through 6, it is a redemption story of where Anakin is the hero. This is a
Mm,
story about Anakin. If you started like most people did in 77 with Luke, you think Luke's the hero. It's
mm,
natural to think. But this is Anakin's story. And I thought, ugh,
mm.
like I just don't have that capacity in my head to want to keep those kinds of stories going. I love writing. I evidently love stories, but I like little ball stories. I like little stories that can just go away like a giant fortune cookie. To answer that question is hard. What do I really love to do? Because what I love to do is learn some interesting thing, be ridiculously passionate about it for some small duration of time, and see if there's any traction somewhere that I can help someone professionally with that information. It's so
Okay.
funny because for, I don't know, maybe more than 12 years, I just saw that Julian Bleeker calls himself an artist. For 10 plus years, my business card just said typist. That's what I was doing.
Linker,
Gray.
how the hell did you get in here?
Dude, the garage was open and I heard some noises downstairs, so I just ambled in. Oh, sorry. Oh, I thought they said, wait, this is 32B, right? I think this is my room now. Oh, sorry, Thursday. My calendar's all screwed up.
Get out of here.
When I was typing, a lot of times things that I pursue don't have the market or whatever. I got involved in a augmented reality company and I was like, this is so cool around like 2018, maybe 2019. And I was like, we could do this thing where we could sell ship blueprints to train people how to repair big battleships and things like this
Mm,
with goggles or glasses or a tablet. If you don't want to wear goggles, you don't have to. But you just hold it up to that part of the ship and you'd see the, overlays of systems, very visual stuff like you and I love. And I was like, this is amazing. And I spoke to someone who had a lot of deep context in the British Navy. And he was like, he goes, and when I'm talking about British Navy, I'm talking about the US Navy. You're going to hate to hear this. And he goes, we still have actual paper blueprints. We still have problems where this particular screw is in every document called like the B1450, but there's been 5 screws that are basically called the B1450, which aren't the same screw. And he goes, this won't work very well here. And I
mm.
like that project collapsed. Like it turned
Like
out to
reality doesn't match the blueprints, basically. So forget it.
100%. And my business concept didn't match any. I was like 25 years ahead of where these people were. This is the same kind of people who took decades to get a BlackBerry onto the base
Right.
by the iPhone had showed up. So it's
Yeah.
I didn't last. So I have learned that my future plans will probably involve something about existing worlds that I can see the very obvious next stage of. I'm fascinated by trash trucks and garbage and logistics and operations kind of things. I want to do something fun there because I know it's real, tangible, and probably has problems I might know how to fix.
I still want to keep diving into this kind of this. You mentioned two things, and they're two very closely connected things, and it resonates with me too. There's something that you love. Everyone has you. I believe that everyone has a reason for being, a purpose in their life, and it's not so much something that you design or create as much as discover where what when you feel most joyful, when you feel fulfilled and meaningful. And if you think about those times in your life, that's probably closely connected to what we might call your purpose, your reason for being. Is like when you're if you're a turtle and you have a dream to fly, it's not going to be a very good dream. It's more about, can you understand what it means to be a turtle? Turtle, I'm slow, I'm determined, I have a hard protective shell. You maybe for a bird, to be a bird is to fly, to sing, to soar. To be a turtle is something totally different. And I think part of it is coming to terms with what makes you feel like you're really in your skin. You're really in your you're resonating with your being, you're feeling like your connection to the universe. That's when I feel like you're connected to your purpose. And then the other piece of it is, how do you find someone that will support that, wants to invest in that, wants to pay for that, or that can be turned into a service? How do you go about thinking about that? How do you create a customer for us yourself?
A lot of times, and this is a funny thing to admit, judging by the fact that I built, like you say, we all build our business trying to find customers. I'm shy. People never believe this when they hear that about me. I'm super shy. And one of my jobs has been professional speaker. So I've spoken on stages thousands. But one of the things you learn is if you speak to thousands, it's very comfortable because all you have to do is keep eye contact for a small amount of time. You're not on. It's not like you're at a party, and especially if you're at a party where you don't really know anybody. And they're like, so why could you possibly be here? My answer to that is to turn it visible. Come on. So to find customers, a lot of times I'm shy but pokey. I might, for instance, in executive coaching, I asked a bunch of executive friends who had, big exits from big wins in their businesses already. They'd done really cool stuff. I said, I'm really thinking about getting into executive coaching. And I don't know if you use executive coaches, but I have some questions. I want to know, what's a timetable that you would normally want to engage with an executive coach? I said, in my mind, the ultimate is 3 months. And 100% of the people said no. They said 6 months minimum. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. I thought you would want like an in and out. And they were like, no, because how do you know that there's any real progress after 3 months? You're
Hmm.
pulling the boots up too fast. And I was like, wow, what's your price flexibility? I ask all these questions saying I'm not trying to ask them to be my client. It's in their head. At some point, I
You
could use that guy. But I was happy with either outcome, which is a different thing. I saw this quote fairly recently too, which is like the very best time to earn money is when you don't need to earn money.
mm-hmm.
Oh, it's Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters. They had been used to making $50 a show. So when they suddenly were making FU money, when Dave rolled into Foo Fighters, he didn't need for anything. He had no financial wants beyond like larger visions of the world, but he was just a working dude. And he said that meant that I didn't have to work super hard to have a number one. I think that's an important ingredient to finding like your best customer, don't you think? My way is I'm
Yeah.
shy. I canvas people to try to find the best possible offer. I fish a little bit out there in those offers, and I look for a lot more often than not. I look for word of mouth. The other piece of my puzzle is I create a lot of media. That's because that's the thing I know how to do. So I make videos, I make articles, I write books. Because someone might come along, see my thing, go, I read your thing. Wow, I feel like I think like you. I want to do things with you. And that's probably the most visible way I do it. The more likely way that I'll get the customer is one-on-one quietly with lots of weird, shy, furtive questions. The way I will get longer stream customers who finally show up eventually in my life, manifesting them, is with content.
There are a whole bunch of interesting things to unpack there. So one is you're not going to be able to have that conversation with a bunch of executives unless you've already established at some level trust, a relationship. You're not going to probably, maybe you could, but probably you're not going to just be able to walk into a room where those people are already there and start asking questions without some kind of, how do you start establishing that rapport? How did you get into that room, for example, that you're talking about? And what was it that you did that created the environment of trust that where you earned the right to ask those questions?
There are two pieces to that recipe. One most people won't do. One is probably easier to do. I'm inherently likable, and I feel that I'm likable because I'm pretty vulnerable. I am admitting my mistakes at every turn. If I have a bad belly, I tell people I have a bad belly. If I was like, oh man, I just threw my phone down the stairs, I think that's the funniest thing in the world to explain my flaws and foibles, which
Yeah.
makes me exceedingly likable. The other thing that people pair with that, this is still part one of this recipe, being likable. The other thing people pair with that is I share all my failures, and I say to people all the time, but I still think we could do it. I feel like there's a thing we could do. Sharing your vulnerability and your failures really helps people. And I think that's part of being likable is that the person doesn't ever think I think I'm smarter than them, which is helpful. The second, and this is the one that's not nearly, very few people are going to be able to do this one. I launched a video show, and I launched a video show where I said to people who should not have said yes to me, yeah, sure, I'll come on your dumb show. And people like who founded very large beverage companies and Sir Mix-a-Lot and the guy who founded Johnsonville, the sausage company, which I got by pretending they had sponsored me for several months ahead of time. I was doing my show and I'm like, we're sponsored by Johnsonville Brats. The true story, and I would tell it often, so people who knew my show knew what I was doing, was I'd gone by the grocery store, saw some of those, what are they called? Cheddar wursts or better cheddars, I think they're called. And I bought it. I was like, I hadn't had those in a while. Tasty. And so I pretended I was sponsored. That led to the founder being on my show. But Dave, here's the glue of the two together. So number one, be super likable. Number two, have a show where you can convince absolute strangers that they want to be your guest because they feel so flattered that you want to ask them questions. The real twist is the third piece that happens with those two elements. The other person on that show with the founder from Johnsonville was this young lady from Boston who runs a store called Colette's Cookies. And Colette deals with Down syndrome, and no one would hire her. Her dad helped her put together her own company where she could do what she wanted to do, which was bake cookies. And she's thriving in Boston. But thriving in a small Boston store kind of way. Founder of Johnsonville and she are on the same show. They get to be pals. Now they have a really great business relationship. Both of those people remember that I was at the elbow of that deal. So in my 2009 book I wrote with Julian Smith, one of the things we said a trust agent does is to be at the elbow of every deal. Never remind anyone you did it. Just be the person who put those things together. That's served me exceedingly well in the be nice and have a show triumvirate of making my business work.
Yeah. So I heard the three things, and I'm just going to name them and label them as we go here. But
Yes.
one is being open and vulnerable enough to be likable, to be approachable. Another one is having some kind of mechanism by which you're bringing new people into your system, whether it's through your media, through a show, or whatever, some kind of mechanism that brings people into your circle. It's like your whatever your area of passion or shared interest is. And the
Yes.
third one is helping other people connect to each other and create value, whether you're a part of it or not. So that's great. Those are like three roots that come into the trunk of the tree, if you will, which is trust. And then the branches of that tree, I think for me in my picture is you're then creating, that puts you in a position to have conversations. And I do believe, I share this belief that customers come out of engaging people in conversation, trial and error, putting offers out there in a way that's very low risk for everyone to kind of like, oh, I could do that for a month and see if anybody wants to buy it. And somebody else might be, yeah, I could buy it for a month and see if I like it. And with putting things out in a kind of provisional way, And you alluded to this when you said you make a ball of you create a ball of learning and then you try and put something out. And over time, those little balls of learning become offers. And over time, I think just watching you, those offers become things that grow into other things. And it's really interesting.
I have to admit that my method thus far to date has been rather labor intensive. I am buying pomegranates and trying to squeeze those little juices out of in between all those little seeds, which means nothing if you've never actually touched the pomegranate. Basically, the hardest possible thing to do is the way I've done it many times over. But that whole part about trying to find ways to just pass value through and not have to be part of the process. Right before we started, this person kind of fishing for business at the beginning of the year had me on his list to check back on. And he says, hey, I don't know if you remember, I'm this guy, I offer fractional private jet concierge services. So if you're like not quite Warren Buffett, but
Mhm.
you know could occasionally find yourself needing a fractional jet, this is the guy you call. And they put together the whole thing. Okay, I got to get from Boston to San Francisco. I'm going to do it on January 15th. What are you going to do for me? He gets the pricing, he gets all the stuff, he can cater, he can limo you to and from, he does the whole deal. I do not need that service as it happens. I don't mind sitting back seat middle in steerage if I have to. I like up front, but I'll sit in the back. But least of all on a private jet, which I've only been on one in my life. However, I talked to the man. I asked him some questions. I got some pricing. I had some thoughts. I said, oh, that's interesting. I asked for some very specific routes so I could, certain people I know who could make use of that service. And I said, I'm going to put you in my list of very useful people because I think this is something where I might have an occasion to do this. So thank you. I said, probably in your sales cycle mindset, hit me in 6 months, maybe even 12 months. I'm not your buyer. I said, but I know your buyers. So we should probably stay in touch. He felt warm. He felt appreciated. Of course, he's received so many deletes and non-replies all morning. And I
Mhm.
was a warm, interesting person. So my being nice will earn me memory from this guy. He'll go, oh, I remember that guy was very nice to me. My being nice will probably earn me some other kind of concession at some point. Not I'm doing it to be like calculating. It's just who I am. But then what it will surely do is at some point this year, I will surely hear some executive say, oh man, my commercial flight got canceled. This meeting is super important to me. And I'm like, is it $8,000 important to you? And we'll contact the guy and that'll have been the price rate between two of the legs or something. It can get costly, it turns out. But so that's how I do it, Dave. And I think the idea of making stuff, learning, creating all that content, all that, I think that is such a sucker's game because the other way I could do it is I could just, I don't know, go buy some laundromats, hire laundromat managers, and just get a little bit of money off the
Mhm.
top of it. That's what I see in the YouTube videos. I mean, there's people out there who really don't want to work, and that's fine. I don't know how to work with those people. That's not my people. I was listening to an audiobook of Warren Buffett, and it's about the story they're telling is around 1999 at some private event that he's at. That there's some kind of very important event that probably everyone knows that I don't know the name of, even though they've said the name 85 times. It's just, but at that event were all those .com wizards at that time in 1999, and they're all basically telling Warren Buffett how he's like an old man and he doesn't know anything and it's good and all that. And they're like, man, we're the new money. We're here. We're like amazing and all this. And of course, this is told with such hindsight. At that
Mhm.
time, how could anyone know what was going to happen? But what they also said was that in the off times, in the not direct conflict moments of this event, they were out there leaning for cameras and trying to get media pulls and all that. Warren was just in his room reading his newspapers and his books as if he could have been anywhere on the planet. He wasn't looking out the window. He went to have some fun. He played some golf and stuff. But guess what he loves? Reading his newspapers, reading his books,
Yeah.
checking things out. He likes the research of things. And so, like you're saying, I think I would like and feel stronger. And I think my possibilitarianism is around things with people who like to work and who like to work on stuff that they feel is meaningful, right? I often worry about meaningful because it's a bourgeois thing to say to people whose grandparents, like mine, had to work in like a paper mill. Like my
Mhm.
grandma made toilet paper for a living. She did not care about meaning. She just wanted her check so that her family could have their food. But I do think that we are of an age and in a world where we can strive towards that. And that might be our wealth. Our wealth might be doing stuff that we want to do instead of doing stuff we have to do.
You say some people don't want to work, but I feel like the people that I know who don't have to work end up depressed more often than not. They end
Yeah.
up feeling that their life is meaningless, that they have no agency. I'm not saying that it's a terrible thing to be wealthy. I just feel like it's not a path to happiness
No.
necessarily.
And people, one thing that money does do is money allows you more options. And I think that's interesting. And I think that one thing money does do is that real basic stuff like healthcare, dental care, some of that really important stuff,
Oh
basic,
yeah,
but
for sure.
fundamental is a much more accurate word. That's great. You know what I mean? Because when you don't have that kind of money and you have a cavity, then you just don't eat on that side of your mouth until it, finally stops being a cavity or hurts more. I just, where my heart and soul feels it would be is I always just want to work on interesting things. I want to work on exciting things. I think that some of your life's work of showing ways to visualize somewhat complex things in the simplest way you could, that's so sexy. I think that's just so much more fun than saying, I got 14% on this thing where I should have only gotten four. Someone out there, that's, oh my gosh, that was 10 more percent. It's just not interesting to me. I don't know. Everyone has a video game they like, everyone has a video game that they love, and everyone has a video game where they grind away at it because they're horrible at it. For some reason, they decide they still have to do, or like golf, right? Golf is
Mm.
one of the sports that if people really love it, what they love is that there's just this little cup sitting out there in the middle of nowhere and it's done nothing to you. And you just get increasingly madder and madder at it as you get older.
I have,
Fascinating.
I have a couple of friends. I have a few friends who fit this category, and I had reconnected with a kid, a guy. He's not a, he's my age. He's not a kid anymore, but he was a kid when I met him. We went to art school together, and I connected with him. He's really happy. He said he's really happy with his life. He's very fulfilled, and he's been doing art his whole life. So I'm like, how did you get there? What happened? And I have a few other friends who are from the outside, people would think, oh, that's a really successful person. But from the inside, part of it is he's just having the discipline to learn to live on less. Because at the end of the day, it's about, did you make more money than you spent? And the people that I know that are happiest are not the ones driving around and spending money that they haven't made yet. A lot of people will spend money before they make it with credit cards and so forth. It's very easy to do that. You can get yourself deep into debt just by, you can have a pretty high income and have a lot of stuff that you haven't really paid for yet. And you can look very successful from the outside. But many of the people that I know that are very happy, Austin Kleon, you might know, is in
Yeah.
that category. I don't have any insight into his income, but he started as a librarian. He was writing his first book, and he's cultivated for his whole life a discipline of just living simply, doesn't spend a lot of money. So he doesn't need a ton of income to have this wonderful life that he has. And I think that's a big part of the equation too. If we want to talk about not just creating a customer, but creating the kind of a life you want, it's at the end of the day, part of it is how it all comes down to how you spend your time and how you spend your money and what kind of customers do you want to create? Who are the people you want to have relationships with? Who's your community?
That's for sure. Because I think even when I think about my executive coaching work, I interview that person far more than they're interviewing me because I can't abide certain humans and certain people rise to be an executive just by mean-natured, mean-spiritedness.
Yeah.
There's a real bunch of jerk holes in executive culture. And for whatever reason, several systems really reward that in ways that I wish they wouldn't. And it's that book that came out, I forget however many years now, the no asshole rule. I just can't
Mm.
abide those kinds of humans. And I think you're right. I think it's deeply tied to how do I want to live my life? I at least want someone who's going to be like, I know it's 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve, but I really need you to take this call. I don't
Right.
want to have to take that call. I would
Yeah.
rather it be like, oh, I just got a text from this guy or woman I like to work with, and it's 11 on Christmas. They're thinking of me. I would love it like that, not that they're some kind of jerk burger who feels entitled to my time because they pay for my time. So I think it is. It's how do you want to work? Who's your best customer? And where do you feel like you can really fulfill? I have so many times tried to do a lot of small business type projects where it's like you're a solo person or you have two or three employees or something. I can definitely tell these people something, but I find that like where I can deliver the most value is a little bit further up. Like once they've had dozens of people or hundreds of people working with them, I can really help because that's when they're starting to have to let go. They can't
Hmm.
be everything, and that's when I can really help. And I think even just learning that detail, Dave, changes everything. Because once you know what slice of the demographic you want, then you can be a lot smarter at spending your time going after it.
Yeah. And just to maybe circle back a little bit to, you said you put a lot of media out there. I think one of the things that the internet has, the web has created positive and negative effects of all different kinds, social media, all these things. But one of the things that has done that I find really powerful, especially for, let's say, people who want to design their life or create their life, is you can take the things that you're really passionate and purposeful and interested about, in your very particular interest, and you can just put it up on the internet. You can put up a blog, you can post on Instagram, you can start an Etsy store for your little thing that you make or whatever it is. And without even having any friends or knowing anybody, you put your passion up there. And there's what, a few billion people on the internet now that are just every day going to Google and searching for this or that, the thing that they're interested in. And even if there's only 10 or 50 or 100 people in the world that share your very particular interest in Batman toys from 1973 or whatever it is,
Right.
you will find you that if you are staking out something, they will find you. And I don't know if this is as true as it used to be, but there are many people who still don't have presence on the internet. They have their accounts. Maybe they have their TikTok account, but they've never posted anything. They have a Substack account, but they've never created an email newsletter. They're reading other people's stuff. They're in that category of people who are making choices, not creating choices. But if you do that, I think you're a tourist on the web. You're visiting. I go to Amsterdam. I have a great time, but I haven't planted down there and lived there. I went
Sure.
to Madrid. I lived there for a year. I got having an address there and living there is a different thing. And so that's, I think, part of that whole, you have this idea, but be nice, connect other people and engage. But that part of where you're engaging that mechanism, I think part of it is the internet is not a scarce resource. You're not crowding out anyone when you create a blog or a web page or start publishing your content. All you're doing is creating more choices for other people. And
Sure.
there's something about this whole idea of connecting your joy with what other people are going to invest their time and their money in, that they see value in, that has to do with the shared common ground, shared interests. And that seems to me that's something that you do very well, is create space for that common ground to emerge.
I love that question. I yes. So let me run with it because the it's so funny because I remember dissuading this person said, I'm very curious. Is there a business around that? And I said, not exactly. I said,
Out of what?
just pure curiosity. I'm a very
Okay.
curious person. I said, there's lots. Haven't you seen Columbo? So there's lots of people who are very curious, but I said, but you have to take it a little further than I think that's neat. But that's not entirely true. So when I say this, I feel like I should go back and tell that guy, all right, well, you were right. I interviewed a person. This is about there's something for everybody. I interviewed this person whose name is Ash Coyote, who is a trans person who made a documentary about furries, the furry community. Before anyone wonders, yes, there are some sexual elements to furries, but it is also just a bunch of people who like to wear these costumes, who like to have this different identity, and they're not any different than reenactors who want to put on Civil War clothes and recreate a battle in great detail.
Just so
Yeah.
everybody understands, I think I know, but a furry is that someone who just likes to dress up like an animal?
who wears some kind of clothing to look like an animal. The most
Okay.
common ones are like wolves and cats and things, but
Okay.
there are scaly furries who dress like dragons. I learned a lot
Okay.
watching, talking to this person.
All
But you
right.
know what I loved? So there's a documentary, it's on YouTube, it's called The Fandom. What I loved about talking to Ash was this is a community of people who sell to each other. This is a community of people who, when someone goes, "Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, look at that suit! You are an crazy, incredible seamstress or sewing person or whatever you call that. What is it? How much does it? How can I buy one?" And anywhere from $3,000 to $13,000 for one of these fursuits, depending on their complexity. I was like, wow, that's significant cash for someone to lay out for a costume one can only wear at certain conventions, ostensibly. But there's people who sell art and who sell stickers and who sell accessories. There's people who go to the music stores and buy banjo picks and then sell them as metal furry claws or whatever. Ha! Banjo picks like five for $1, and they're going there selling for $25 for a set, or taking a furry glove and sticking the picks through it. And so they're making a ecosystem of money. Now, the people that they count amongst their ranks are lawyers and really high level, professionals, four, five, 600,000 a year kind of people who also like this thing. So all that to say, my curiosity was like, oh my gosh, these people, they're non-licensed. They're not looking at Spider-Man stuff. They don't give their money to Marvel, this large
Hmm.
Disney enterprise. They're
Yeah.
giving it to each other. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. So I think if you can bring curiosity to bear on interesting things that you would never normally spend any time in, you also can extract possible ideas for business that aren't necessarily in that. That idea of a community that can serve each other. When you said about Etsy, for instance, the number one buyers of Etsy products are Etsy sellers
I believe it.
because they're there. So
Cool.
I think that there's something to these loops that we can create. And like you said, in these digital worlds we can build, you're not taking anything away as long as you're not like full on stealing people's ideas and intellectual property or physical property. You're just bringing another opportunity or another option to a group of people who would like to have options.
Again, well, that circles me back again and to this topic of your guy who offered to paint your house for you, that customers emerge out of conversations
Yes.
and getting to know each other and people getting to know each other. And I've been researching this a little bit because I have at least one friend who has had a very negative reaction to this idea of, well, life isn't just about money, Dave. It's so much more, and it is so much more. And money is a big part of how we operate in the world. And when I did start doing some research into it, money is older than history. We don't even know where money first came from. Money was there before we had words, before we had at least any kind of a written word or anything like that. And the first money that they know about was called the shekel. And the shekel was a word that meant two things. It meant a certain size coin, and it also meant a bag of grain. I think it was a bag of barley. Yeah, it meant a certain amount of barley. So whether and the theory, there's all kinds of theories, but the one that I think is most interesting is I think came maybe David Graeber talks a little bit about this in his book, The History of Debt, which is a great book. But that it wasn't like people were actually doing everything in terms of trading barley, but barley was like a standard. So it's okay. A bag of barley is like our idea of value. And all I want to do is I want a glass of milk. So it might be that it's half a shekel for a glass of milk or a goat skin or whatever we're talking about. But so it wasn't like people were walking around with big sacks of barley. The coin just gave them a way to exchange some kind of value. And if you did farm a bunch of barley and you took it to the big Sumerian warehouse or whatever, they'd give you some shekels and you could walk around with the shekels and buy things. Nobody knows
Right.
exactly what was happening there. But I think a lot of it just has to do with money is simply a way to, if you think about it just as a tool, as a mechanism, it's a way to save up. You work for a week
Yeah.
and that work has a value. And you don't want to necessarily go every time you need something, go and say, I'll work for you for a week for if I can get these things. It's just it just streamlines that whole process of saying, okay, I'm going to store up and save some of that value that I created, store it for a rainy day, like the grasshopper and the ants. I'm not going to just fiddle my life away.
Right.
Um, I don't know. There's something about, I understand that life is not just about money, but I think it would be a mistake to live a life where you just ignored the fact that it's there
Right.
because it can be a very useful tool. It can be a very useful, and we all need to live. We all need to survive somehow.
And it's not, I always like to say that people hate to be sold to, but we love to buy. You just, the smallest, little, dumbest things in the world. I love Yeti mugs. There's one on my desk. I like the brand Yeti for their mugs. I don't have their 500 or so dollar cooler, but I thought the mug was fine. And my thought about that sort of a product, there you go. My thought about that sort of a product is that whoever it was, I forget, who said, now, this is a great mug. I was like, really? And I bought one and I was like, wow, that is a great mug. And then suddenly my parents had like 20 something of them. They have them in their house almost like it's a prized collection because they've got all the different colors that you could get. And I was like, wow, good for you, mom and dad. And no one twisted their arm. No one said you should go buy 20 Yeti mugs. It just came out of this moment where someone said, this is really good for this thing. And I think that the people who tell me how bad money is are the people who like to tell me what they spent their money on. And I always am so twisted by that notion. Oh, money's stupid. By the way, I'm going to this cool convention and I can't wait to, I'm going to meet, Nathan Fillion and I'm going to pay $100, but he's going to sign my shirt.
Right.
Okay. But that's the same thing. We love to really countermand our own logic, don't we?
I'll bracket that just by saying, I think, of course, life isn't just about money. It's just a fact of life that we have to, it's part of a fact of existence. It's a system we could maybe with a ton of effort try and create alternatives to, but it is the system that we live in. And also it's a way of showing appreciation. When you give somebody a tip, you don't have to, it's not like you always have to do that. It's a way to show, for me, the relationship that you can build with a customer is different than just people just liking your post on Facebook. It's different when they pay you $20. And it's not that necessarily you need the $20, but
Right.
it's also a way of someone not just telling you that they like what you're doing, but showing you that they appreciate what you're doing. They buy your
Well,
artwork. They,
here's a question,
yeah.
Dave. Have you early in your universe, did you ever have that experience of people saying something's going to be great, and when it comes time to sell it, no one buys it? And you're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
well, what happened there? You just told me that was going to be great. How come you
Yeah.
didn't buy it? Just in general, it's great. You can really disassociate the difference between someone saying something's great versus someone paid. And I
I
think that
remember
that's
there was specifically, I remember I was working in a newspaper in Seattle in the early 90s. A friend of mine who was in the art department with me, we were in the art department, had an idea for a t-shirt. I don't remember the idea, but I remember him walking around showing people his idea for a t-shirt. Hey, would you buy this? Would you buy this? And everyone was like, yeah. So he went and printed 1,000 t-shirts or something, and nobody bought them. And this is where I think this is a kind of a useful concept to think about is if he had gone around taking deposits and taking orders saying, hey, I'm going to like what we can now do on Kickstarter. If he had gone around and said, hey, give me, do you want one of these t-shirts? I'm going to get them printed. Give me a $5 deposit. And he took orders, it would have been a whole different story. He would have either got orders or he would have learned that no one actually wants his t-shirt. So that is also, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris, because I think that's really useful as a filter. So it's a really powerful just concept. And I guess you could, I guess it's a kind of a way of showing up in the world.
it
And
is.
my perspective is once you start doing it, you never stop. It's hard to stop because it's so rewarding and fulfilling in so many different ways.
It's almost that thought of like where the intersection of where you spend your time and where you spend your money. That's how that you're in a spot that matters in some way.
Mm,
Because I was
yeah.
just thinking about the fact that there's all these, oh, what are they called? Like wantrepreneurs and all that. What they really mean is they just want really cool I don't know, cars or watches or
Yeah.
jets, or something like that. And so they fantasize about that stuff a lot. But what they don't do is invest in that stuff, or they don't invest on the way to there. So there's like that sort of, oh, you didn't quite make the X on that one. You only
Mhm.
make the X where your money and your time intersect.
Okay, there are a couple things I wanted to get to, and I want to make sure I cover them.
Yeah. Okay.
One is your three words. Every year, you come up with three words that provide a focus for your coming year. You want to talk about that? Either your three words for this year, or or why you do that, and how that helps you?
Yeah, so I came up with the idea back in 2006. Everyone was kicking around these sort of, here's my one word that I'm going to guide myself on the year. And I'm just not that smart. So I thought maybe if I had three, I could at least triangulate a little. And in my head, I really thought of it that way, as maybe one of these three words will catch it all, because I don't feel like if you try to trust me with one word, I'll probably fail. So I thought, maybe there's three words that'll help me make better decisions and choices. So I tried to pick words that if I was going to spend my time in a certain way, I would look to my questions and see how they work. So my very first, which were some of my most successful in 2006, were real basic: ask, do, and share. Very easy. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid. Do more things. Try experiments. Like you heard this at the early part of the interview. That's something I like to do. Share what I've learned, which is why I've made so much media over my time. So that's why I picked. Great year. This year, I've picked fusion, which I mean is learn a lot, but also then try to mush that learning into something else and make it more usable. So it's not just learn to learn, but learn to apply. So fusion. Next word is apps. And by that, I just mean little sort of recurring running processes or systems of my own, where in which, for instance, I have an app for when I sit down to write. I do these six things and then I make sure I do that and then I write the stuff. And so that's an app. So one of the things I do now every day when I'm starting my planning for the day is I load the apps that I'm going to need, which are 3x5 index cards, no technology required beyond circa 280 technology. And then the third one is pulse, which is to remind myself to take my pulse, to reflect, to look back on the stuff I've been doing and get a better gauge of, is this going anywhere? Is this stacking up? I don't like goals, but I like accomplishments. I don't necessarily want to go after something, but I like having one. And there's two ways to collect things in life like that. You can either, I must do this thing. I'm going to write a new book this year, no matter what. And I'd rather just have written 1,000 words every day or 2,000 words every day, which is my numbers. You could start with 500. And so having the pulse thing is reminding me reflect. So I'm opening my journal the whole week before. I'm looking at my work log and seeing like, where did I spend my time? Because I want to measure myself against what my intentions are. And so those are my three words. Did you go along with me on this for this year? Do you have three words ready to go?
No, I don't. I thought about it, but I have a compass. I do have a compass that I use that has served me every year, hasn't actually changed from year to year. If I did have words, they would be about establishing rhythm and building community. So I do have a picture of what I want to do. I want to get down to that, like you said, that daily. I want to have a daily rhythm, a weekly rhythm, a monthly rhythm. I want to get established in a kind of a pace and a cadence. So I do have that list of words. There's probably about 10 of them. I haven't got it down to three yet. But yeah, so there's something about being intentional. It's almost like I love the idea of triangulating but I haven't done it yet. Sorry.
No, it was just a note. And you're right. All those things that you laid out do have words that kind of suggest themselves. Cadence, for instance, was
Yeah.
very close to being one of my words this year
Yeah.
for that same reason. I think it's like that book Flow by Chick Sent Me High. It's definitely that notion that sometimes it's about sequence. I have a recurring passion about the concept of sequence, meaning sometimes it's not doing the right things, it's doing the right things in the right order. That's the most important part. And so I think that my creative and thinking and not applied to something ethereal, sorry, not something tangible just yet, are things like that, like trying to concept sequences a bit more and think about more of that sort of thing. But like I said, I think like grounding it like you're doing in the School of the Possible, that's a powerful way to do it. Just like I started looking at sensor projects like Arduino sensors. I wanted to see if I owned a dumpster, could I make the dumpster smarter? And I was looking through that. And of course, there's easy ones. So much light tells you it's this full, and now you should send a truck. And there's ones about temperature so that you can tell if maybe there's something gross in your dumpster. So you'd probably want to send a truck sooner to get the gross thing out because there's a chemical reaction happening. So I was thinking through iterations. And to do that was for me to try to think of, I need something to push my energy towards, or it's just not. If you learn for learning's sake, it's like saying, I think I'll learn Swahili, but you don't know anybody who speaks Swahili, so you're screwed. When you were in Madrid, boy, you sure had to learn some Spanish.
Oh yeah.
So it's like that.
Yeah. My proudest moment was when I was walking through a park in Madrid, and this couple came up to me and they were lost, and they asked me directions in Spanish, thinking I was local. And I was able to actually understand their question, and I actually knew what they were looking for, and I could point them in the right direction. And I had enough Spanish to be able to say, "Oh yeah, it's down, it's the block that way to the right." And sorry for my Spanish. If you're helping me think, okay, I do want three words, and I will tell you that they're circling around. There's one about the kind of the 80-20 rule. Maybe it's impact is the word. But
Mhm.
there's something about wanting to focus on the 20% of my activities that deliver 80% of the value. So that's one of them. There's another one that's about rhythm, cadence, pacing. And there's another one about this kind of connecting others idea, this thing that's out being, not having to be a part of the value creation, but being maybe a crossroads or an intersection, or being a place that or creating place for those kind of connections to happen. I don't know what the words are. I have the ideas, but not the words. And I think it's a very powerful idea to talk about triangulation, because triangle is the most stable shape. It's the most balanced shape. I mean, make pyramids have lasted for thousands of years. A triangle is a triangulation is a really important concept. In fact, it was one of the core practices in liminal thinking, was to triangulate. Look for, don't just assume that your perspective is the right one. Find 3 points of view, and now you start to get a three-dimensional space picture of whatever the territory is that you're looking at.
No, trade routes wouldn't exist without triangulation. There's X,
Mhm.
there's Y, but if you don't have Z, then you don't know where anything is. There's just so many other, bits of knowledge that come from three. And Trinity, if you're religious, there's just so many. And I think that,
Well, and the sextant in boat navigation, I'm from New Bedford, so I have a little bit of that shared nautical knowledge. The sextant is triangulation between the ship, the horizon, and a star, right? It's a
right,
triangulation, but it's essential to navigation. Yeah, I really like your concept there. I just have to still figure out how to apply it to my life.
see,
What?
we have names. My great grandmother lived in New Bedford,
Oh,
right
really?
down the road.
The last thing I wanted to hit on that we haven't quite got to is the concept of journaling, which is, I think, or diary, or whatever you want to call it, note
Sure.
taking, the conversation that you have with yourself when you're, the times that you take to reflect on, okay, what's going on? What does it mean to me? I think it was Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth living, just before he drank his hemlock. But this concept of, let's say, the examined life, the making time to reflect. You posted recently on LinkedIn, or I think maybe it was a blog post, about your intentions for journaling, and without feeling tied to a specific word, journal, planner, but this conversation that you have with yourself. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that and why you think it's important?
Yes. And I will say that this concept was a little more pushed on me by my CEO, who said, "Oh, I'm surprised you don't journal." And then a
Hmm.
little later, he said something else. "Oh, I feel like people who journal would actually have that information." And then he was like, "You only have to hear it about
Oh,
3 times before you're like,
he doesn't sound that
right."
subtle.
I was like, "Oh, I will be journaling. I get it." So I did. It's halfway between the reality and whatnot, but it's funnier to say it that way. But I started journaling and I started counting on it. I started being able to go back and look at it and go, "Oh, that's interesting." And I could track. I deal with depression, a very minor case of major clinical depression, and it's mostly chemical. So it's like eyeglasses. If you don't have the meds, you don't have the mood or whatever. But there are lots of real life things that can impact someone's mood, even if you're not dealing with depression. And me having a way to write a little bit of that into a journal, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was able to notate certain activities that kept happening. And then as I've gone on and really worked the process and all that, I've learned that when I go back and reflect, sometimes it lets me keep a little more object permanence on things that matter to me. And so sometimes just a weird thing. Anne Frank has this quote that I have thought about ever since I started this, where she said, I mean, think about Anne Frank for a minute, like think of the person I'm copying from here.
Yeah.
She says, there is a saying that paper is more patient than man.
Mm.
And she said it came back to me on one of my slightly melancholy days. I'm thinking, Anne Frank writing melancholy, understated. She said, feeling too bored and limp to even make up my mind whether to go out or stay at home. There's no doubt the paper is patient, and I don't intend to show this cardboard covered notebook bearing the proud name of diary to anyone unless I find a real friend, probably someone who cares. And I don't have such a
Mm.
real friend. And she was just basically saying, I can pour into this thing that's not going to judge me or be mean to me or whatever.
Yeah.
And I,
Paper is a good listener. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I took that to heart. And it was related. The same boss had another comment that I really liked. Was he said, oh, somebody from Harvard, and I'm going to forget that guy's name, Dr. somebody rather from Harvard about AI, was calling AI a cognitive partner. And that's now the only phrase we say when we're talking about something like ChatGPT is that it's a cognitive partner. You treat it like this. You say, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think I'm thinking about? I think that my journal is another cognitive partner because I can, it's a far more primitive one because I can go and ask it things by reading some of my segments and going, oh, and thinking through. You hear I say oh a lot. I discover a lot because I have the brain of Dory from Finding Nemo. So when I have it all written down, I can look at it over and over again. So it's good.
There's something that I don't know if you'll find this useful, but something that I've do with my journal, which is I read a lot of Carl Jung, so I'm interested in this relationship that we have with our unconscious. The conscious being the stream of consciousness, the 10% of the small bit of things that we're thinking about at any given moment, and the unconscious being all the stuff, but you're not thinking about it the second. I know what an elephant looks like. I wasn't thinking about it till I said it, but it's in there. It's part of the unconscious. And what I've been doing with my journaling, it might be useful to you, is every night, but right before I go to bed, I write down whatever is a problem or a question or something I want my unconscious to work on while I'm sleeping.
Mm.
Could be I'm working on a project, so I got a bunch of projects. So sometimes it's just I want to write the web page for this product, or I need to write this chapter for the next edition of Games Terming that I'm working on.
Nice.
Whatever it is. And then when I wake up, before I do anything else, I pick up the journal and I just start stream of consciousness writing. So
Oh,
that's the practice that I have. And what's interesting is sometimes I get nothing, but sometimes I just the writing just flows. Even though I don't remember the dreams, I usually try and write down the dream. But sometimes I get an image in the dream I can draw. Oh wow, why was I like just the not last night, but the night before, I dreamed about these vertical ski slopes. They were really steep and very high, and I was at the bottom, and people were coming down there almost like paratroopers with helmets. They were having a great time, but it looked pretty scary. And
wow.
so I'm like, oh, okay, is that my unconscious? Is that a metaphor for the school of the possible that people are sliding down these giant, or what is it? I don't know. But they're having fun. They had helmets on. They're having fun. So that my unconscious will occasionally serve up these kind of mysterious, because the language of the unconscious is symbolic. It doesn't answer in words, it answers in kind of these images or these dream kind of stories or whatever. But that's been a really interesting way for me to practice that, because you say this conversation with yourself and you're not really, the paper is not really a person, but in a way, if you think about, you're having a conversation with your unconscious self.
Right.
And my friend Mike Parker said he actually has someone that he knows that will literally imagine a question, imagine folding it up, imagine putting it into a letterbox to the unconscious, and then going to sleep and seeing what happens.
Wow. It's funny about the image about the paratroopers and all that. One of the more vivid images. Well, it's funny to think about some of my recurring images, and I always love to. We could talk another 2 hours on that, but I had this one, and I do like when your brain solves a problem in a tidy way. While
Yeah.
you wake up and you're like, oh, and it was this. I was trying to envision this concept, and it's too many words, but essentially the visual that I got in my dream is almost like shelving cabinetry that you would have if you ran a map store. So
Mm.
lots of long, thin, flat shelves where you could slide a bunch of maps or
Yeah.
posters into or
Flat
whatever.
files, they call them. I went to
Oh,
art
thank
school,
you.
so I know.
Yep.
Yeah, flat
Yes,
files.
you would know. In my mind, the solution to my problem was something like flat files, and
Mm.
the concept was basically you don't need all these things right now, and you don't need them all visible right now. It's okay if you can't see them, but you do want to grab a clump of them at a time. That's what I pulled back to the waking
Ah.
world. And I went, huh, that kind of does solve this thought I had. And so I'm going to try your idea because I think that there's a space in my journal, and there's also the opportunity for me to I think there's an opportunity for me to have that conscious, subconscious conversation. So that's fun.
Yeah, maybe if you have time, it might be fun to do another one of these where we just go deep into journaling because there's a super rich whole bunch of things that could come out of that conversation. But let me just start closing this out and summarizing.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about how to create a customer and how you do that. And here was my takeaway that I really love is that, again, going back to your triangulation, you gave me three kind of triangulation points that are like your customer creating habit, maybe a life habit. One is be nice. The other one is be curious. And the third one is be a connector. And those are the three things that you put together that when you're nice, when you're curious, when you're a connector, you're creating the conversations out of which all those kind of things emerge.
I think so. And nice, I'm back and forth on the difference between nice and kind. And I'll tell
Mm,
you the reason why I would swap that word now that I'm
okay.
hearing it. The reason is that I had this person who worked for me for a while, and I got many compliments about the person that they were nice. But what no one ever said was that they were effective. What no
Yeah.
one ever said was they were great at what they did. They just said nice. And
Well,
then I
maybe
let
likable is maybe the word. Be likable.
likable is good too. Yeah. But I think where that goes though, or when people say, I hate the word genuine, I'll never use it in my lifetime. But
Oh,
it's
you
really,
just used it.
I know. That's it. Now I'm done. I've lied. I think I guess what I'm trying to get at is really connect with, really engage. The nice part is just being someone that you could approach and someone that you'd feel comfortable saying the thing you're not comfortable saying to some other people. I've had those conversations for days with billionaires, 100 millionaires, and poor people. I've all the way through. So it's just definitely, I think it's something in the neighborhood of nice. I don't know.
All right. So thank you so much for your time, Chris Brogan. You're a New York Times bestselling author and an executive coach. Just to close the loop on customers, say I'm watching the show and I want to become your customer. I want to be your customer, Chris. What's the best way for me to start that conversation with you?
Oh, I guess swing by chrisbrogan.com, grab my newsletter. If you get
Yeah,
my newsletter, you'll know quickly. It comes out every Sunday, has since 2009, January 2009.
I get it.
Um, it you'll know, oh, I like the way this person thinks, or you'll be like, this guy's an idiot. You'll know in three or so newsletters and either just hit unsubscribe. You don't even have to tell me. It's completely free to unsubscribe and just leave anytime you want without talking to me if you don't like it. And then if you do like it, then just hit reply because my newsletter doesn't come from do not reply at please God don't write back to me.com. It comes from an actual addressable newsletter that actually goes to my inbox. So just hit reply.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to connect with you. Thank you so much for joining.
This is like Eddie Van Halen invited me with my brand new first time guitar to talk to him. So this is the best day of my life, Dave Grace. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Art of the Possible. To learn more, and discover your best next step, come visit us at schoolofthepossible.com. See you next time. Okay, now we can have the after party. Oh,
So
this was really great. I'm going to look up, first thing I want to do is look up Ash Coyote and the fandom, and it's like,
it was
sounds
fascinating.
really fascinating, like a world.
They were so interesting, those people. I have no interest in kind of the lifestyle, let's say, of that. But I thought the people just having their own culture was just fascinating.
Yeah, but it also reminded me, I knew a guy named Danny Asindi, I think was his name, at Red Herring. This was in the 90s, but I remember him trying to explain to me what Red Herring was. And I think we were doing some work with them. And he kept talking about it's a community whose audience is itself, but it's
Wow.
also like like a media where the people in the community are generating their own. I don't know if I can't even take my mind back to where I didn't understand that concept, where I was
Yeah.
trying to process it.
Because now it's like what we do, right? It's the
Right, right.
media has that extra leg in the chair that it didn't before.
And
Um,
I had so many conversations in those years. One was with Ross Mayfield, who started,
I
I think it
know
was a wiki.
you had a
Uh,
wiki product.
yeah, I forget the name of it. Uh,
Yeah, I can't remember
but
either.
he was explaining to me what a wiki was. And I was like, what is it, like a blog, like a website? Yes, yes, yes. It's that too. It's that too. It's that too. I was like, well,
Right.
look, and I was like, that was a whole other fascinating itch.
They're back in some ways. The company where I work now, the company that they sell a bunch of apps that ride on top of other platforms. And one of those companies that they've worked with for some time now is Atlassian. One of Atlassian's biggest products is called Confluence, which is basically in its little belly a wiki. It's just now a much more robust, sophisticated content management system. The thing.
Yeah.
Social Text was his wiki
Yeah, that's
company.
right. Thank you. Social
I forgot the
text.
name. I had to look it up. Ross is good. Ross is now heading like product at Zoom, which
I
I think is
noticed that. Yeah, he shared with me. He saw I was asking about how to do werewolf on Zoom, and he made an app. They made an app to play werewolf. Have you ever played werewolf?
I love Werewolf.
I do too.
It's a great game.
I I tried to organize a Zoom call with the werewolf game just for fun over the holidays, and I got almost enough people showing up. Had 5 people, and we didn't quite have enough, but you can do it on Zoom pretty easily. So if you're up for
Yeah,
that, I'll put you on the list of my werewolf invitation list for the next time.
I am down to hear the invite. Yes. The interesting thing you were saying about this was that my boss, the guy I was just talking about the company where the software and stuff, they all played a game of Werewolf in 2008 at this event called AtlasCon,
Oh
which
wow.
was one of the shared experiences that a whole lot of people took from that event and remembered with great fondness, which led to my boss buying 25 companies run by some of these people who played werewolf with him.
Oh wow.
So, and that's how they think of each other is we played werewolf. And
The werewolves.
yes, exactly. So it's just funny how the world is a big circle sometimes.
Werewolves really, really interesting socially as well as being fun to play because it is about trust and it's very playful. And of course, it's like evil at the same time.
Yes.
But it's like poker in that way. It's a fun game with real social, it's a way to play,
Mm-hmm.
but also it's where you learn really interesting social skills. It was like part of what I was thinking with the School of the Possible is when you go to school, you learn as much or more on the playground as you actually learn in the classroom
So
about
true.
life. And I want to try and create a school where you have all that learning that goes on in the playground, in the classroom, in the community, and in the hallways, in the cafeteria. There's all these different kinds of learning that people
Yes.
have when they're building common ground together and creating community. So
Well
good to
done.
see you.
Really good to connect. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
having me.
yeah,
All right, we'll talk again really soon.
yeah. Good to see you,
Good to talk.
Chris.
Take good
Take
care.
care.
I know.
Bye.